My sister-in-law convinced my husband to change our will, removing me as beneficiary in case I left him. She drew up papers making herself executor while I remained oblivious. His family celebrated their smart planning while pitying his risky marriage. When he signed the documents, he had no idea what I'd already changed. Let's just make sure she walks away with nothing. The words hit me like ice water as I stood frozen outside Elise's sitting room, the silver tea tray trembling in my hands. The delicate china cups rattled against their saucers, creating a symphony of betrayal that seemed to echo through the hallway. I pressed my back against the wall, barely breathing as my mother-in-law's laugh, that same warm laugh she'd given me just hours earlier, followed the cruelest sentence I'd ever heard spoken about me. "Oh, Erica, you're terrible," Elise whispered, but her tone carried amusement, not disapproval. "But you're right. We can't let 20 years of building this family's reputation get handed over to someone who could just leave." The irony burned in my chest. Here I was, literally serving them tea like the dutiful daughter-in-law I'd tried so hard to be, while they plotted my financial destruction. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to remain still, to listen, to finally understand what I'd been too naive to see for 3 years. "Wesley's always been too trusting," Erica continued, her voice carrying that same authoritative tone she used when reorganizing his closet or canceling his plans. "Remember Jennifer? At least she had the decency to come from money. This one." She paused and I could practically see her dismissive wave. "This one works at that little marketing firm downtown. What does she make? 40,000 a year. It's embarrassing." The tea tray grew heavier in my hands as memories flooded back. Every sideways glance, every backhanded compliment, every time they'd made me feel small. It all crystallized into this moment of perfect, horrible clarity. I should have seen it coming at our wedding reception. The first red flag had been waving right in front of me, but I'd been too blinded by love and hope to notice. Erica had pulled Wesley away from our head table just as dinner was being served, claiming she needed to discuss something urgent about the photographer. 20 minutes passed while I sat alone, my new husband's empty chair beside me like a physical manifestation of how the rest of our marriage would unfold. "Where did they go?" Great Aunt Margaret had asked, her eyes twinkling with champagne and curiosity. "Just handling some family business," I'd replied, forcing my smile to stay bright while inside, something small and trusting began to wither. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, making polite conversation about the flowers, the music, anything to fill the awkward void left by the groom's absence. When Wesley finally returned, Erica's arm linked possessively through his expression had changed. The soft, adoring look he'd worn during our vows had been replaced by something more distant, more thoughtful. Later, much later, I'd learned she'd spent those 20 minutes planting the first seeds of doubt about my motives for marrying him. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she'd whispered to him, her voice dripping with sisterly concern. "I mean, you know I love her, but gold diggers can be very convincing. They have to be." Of course, I knew none of this at the time. I'd convinced myself Erica's behavior was just protective instinct, the natural wariness of a sister who'd watched over her brother for 32 years. I told myself she'd warm up to me once she realized I genuinely loved Wesley, that I wasn't some opportunistic woman trying to climb the social ladder. How foolish I'd been. Erica had always been the puppet master of Wesley's life, and I'd walked into her carefully orchestrated world without realizing I was disrupting her control. She'd picked his clothes since college, crisp button-downs and tailored slacks that made him look successful but approachable. She'd guided his career decisions, steering him toward the family's accounting firm where she could monitor his progress and connections. Most tellingly, she'd handpicked his previous girlfriends, each one a carbon copy of herself. Wealthy, socially connected, and completely deferential to family hierarchy. I was everything she hadn't ordered from the catalog of appropriate partners. "Some hobbies are more suitable for a man in his position," she'd said just last month when I'd suggested Wesley might enjoy taking cooking classes with me. Her laugh had been sharp enough to cut glass, dismissive enough to end the conversation. Wesley had looked embarrassed, not by her rudeness but by my suggestion. "Erica's right," he'd mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "I should probably stick to golf. More networking opportunities." I'd watched her delete contacts from his phone during family gatherings, her manicured fingers swiping names away with surgical precision. "Just helping you stay organized, sweetie," she'd coo, though I noticed she never deleted the numbers of women she'd approved of, his ex-girlfriends who still sent him Christmas cards and birthday wishes. The family dinners were perhaps the cruelest torture of all. Every Sunday we'd gather around Elise's mahogany dining table and somehow, always somehow, I'd end up seated at the far end, beside Cody who spoke maybe 10 words per evening. Erica claimed her rightful place at Wesley's side, where she could whisper family jokes and shared memories that I'd never be part of. "How's that little job of yours going?" Elise would ask with manufactured interest, the word little hanging in the air like a judgment. "Actually, I got promoted to senior account manager," I'd reply, trying to inject pride into my voice. "Oh, how nice," Elise would respond, then immediately pivot. "Erica, tell everyone about your charity work with the hospital board. Such important connections she's making." I'd begun bringing wine to these dinners just to have something to do with my hands during the long stretches of being ignored. The bottle became my security blanket, something to unwrap and pour when the conversation inevitably turned to family history I wasn't part of, achievements that predated my existence, or future plans that somehow never included me. Everything shifted when Garrett passed away. The man who'd been kind to me, who'd made an effort to include me in conversations and ask about my work, was suddenly gone. And with his death came a transformation in the family dynamic that I hadn't seen coming. The funeral should have been about grief, about celebrating a life well lived. Instead, it became a strange sort of audition with various family members positioning themselves as the rightful inheritors of Garrett's legacy. I heard phrases like, "carrying on his vision," and "maintaining family standards," whispered between hymns and eulogies. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Documents were shuffled away when I approached. Wesley began staying late at Erica's house for family business meetings that I was never invited to attend. "It's just boring estate stuff," he'd tell me when he'd come home after 10 o'clock, smelling like Erica's expensive coffee and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who'd been making difficult decisions. "Nothing you'd be interested in." But I was interested. I was his wife. I was supposed to be part of these decisions, part of this family's future. Instead, I was being systematically excluded from planning my own life. Standing in that hallway now, eavesdropping on the women who were supposed to love me, everything finally made perfect, devastating sense. The casual cruelty in their voices was somehow worse than outright anger would have been. This wasn't passionate hatred. This was cold calculation, like discussing the weather or planning a grocery list. I set the tea tray down on the hallway table with shaking hands, the fine china singing a soft, mournful note. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain they'd hear it through the walls. But their conversation continued, unaware of my presence. Walking back to the kitchen on unsteady legs, I gripped the marble countertop and tried to process what I'd just learned. For 3 years I'd been playing a game where I didn't know the rules, fighting a battle I didn't realize was being waged. But now I knew. And knowledge, I was about to discover, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. In the weeks that followed my accidental discovery in the hallway, I became a student of deception. I perfected the art of appearing unchanged while cataloging every subtle shift in my husband's behavior. Wesley had always been an early riser, but now he lingered over his morning coffee with an intensity that suggested serious contemplation. His usual quick scan of emails had turned into prolonged sessions of staring at his laptop screen, as if wrestling with invisible demons. The bomb dropped on a Tuesday morning in October. I was buttering toast when Wesley cleared his throat in that particular way that meant he had something unpleasant to discuss. The same throat clearing that had preceded conversations about visiting his mother more often or attending charity galas I found insufferable. "I've been thinking about our financial planning," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar formality. "Erica suggested we should rework the will. You know, standard protection in case of complications." The butter knife slipped from my fingers, clattering against the granite countertop. Wesley's eyes remained fixed on his coffee mug, studying the dark liquid as if it contained prophecies about our future. The morning light streaming through our kitchen window suddenly felt harsh, illuminating the growing distance between us with cruel clarity. "Complications?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the flutter of panic in my chest. "Divorce," he said flatly, still refusing to meet my gaze. "It's just smart planning. Protecting family assets." The phrase "standard protection" rolled off his tongue with rehearsed precision, like a memorized script performed by an amateur actor. These weren't Wesley's words. They belonged to someone else, someone who had spent considerable time coaching him on this conversation. The man I'd married would have stumbled over such clinical language, would have softened the blow with apologies and explanations. I thought we could discuss it together. I suggested testing the waters. Maybe meet with a lawyer ourselves? Wesley's cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down too forcefully. Erica's already handled the research. She found an excellent attorney who specializes in estate planning. Very thorough. Of course she had. Erica, the ever-efficient puppet master, had already pulled the strings while I remained blissfully unaware. The invisible noose was tightening and I hadn't even felt it slip around my neck. Days passed without further mention of legal documents or family protection. Wesley resumed his normal routines. Morning jogs, evening news, weekend golf games, as if he hadn't just announced his intention to legally erase me from his future. The normalcy felt surreal, like living in a house scheduled for demolition while pretending the wrecking ball wasn't already swinging. I began paying closer attention to his habits, noting when he received calls that required him to step outside, when his laptop sessions extended past midnight, when he mentioned impromptu meetings that hadn't been on his calendar that morning. The man who had once shared every detail of his day now operated with the secretive efficiency of a spy. The discovery came accidentally, as most life-altering revelations do. Wesley had rushed out for an emergency golf game. Apparently, someone in his foursome had cancelled, and they needed a replacement immediately. In his haste, he'd left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing with unfinished business. I walked past it twice before curiosity overcame my respect for privacy. A document was open in a browser tab and my own name caught my eye like a flashing neon sign. My heart began hammering against my ribs as I leaned closer to read. Last Will and Testament of Wesley James Morrison. The words swam before my eyes as I scanned the legal language, searching for familiar names and recognizable terms. There was Wesley's name, of course, and Elisa's and various charitable organizations that the family had supported for years. I found Erica's name listed in multiple capacities, as beneficiary, as executor, as the person entrusted with carrying out Wesley's final wishes. My name appeared exactly once, in a paragraph that had been crossed out with digital strike-through formatting. Where Sarah Elizabeth Morrison had once stood as primary beneficiary, Erica's full name now claimed that position. The document was dated 3 days earlier. They had moved with military precision while I remained completely oblivious. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, frantically capturing screenshots of the screen. The first attempt was blurry, my trembling fingers unable to hold steady. The second was too dark. By the third try, tears were clouding my vision, but I managed to document the evidence of my own erasure. Seeing my name struck through felt like reading my own obituary while still breathing. The clinical efficiency of it was almost more devastating than the betrayal itself. I hadn't been removed in anger or passion. I'd been eliminated with the same careful consideration one might use to cancel a magazine subscription. The weekend following this discovery, Erica orchestrated one of her famous family brunches. These gatherings were typically torture sessions disguised as social events, but this particular Sunday carried an atmosphere of celebration that I couldn't quite identify. The mimosas flowed more freely, the laughter rang more genuine, and everyone seemed to move with the relaxed confidence of people who had successfully completed a difficult task. Erica floated through the gathering like a queen surveying her kingdom, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen it. She wore a new dress, something expensive in a shade of emerald that complemented her complexion perfectly, and carried herself with the satisfied air of someone who had just won a significant victory. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, raising her crystal champagne flute high above the assembled family. "To future security and family wisdom." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Future security, code for the financial arrangements that no longer included me. Family wisdom, praise for the collective decision to protect assets from the outsider who had somehow infiltrated their ranks. Elise clinked her glass with enthusiasm, her eyes bright with what I now recognized as relief. Other family members joined the toast with varying degrees of understanding, some clearly in on the joke while others simply enjoyed the festive atmosphere. Wesley participated in the toast but never looked in my direction. His eyes remained fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, as if I had become invisible, a ghost already haunting the periphery of his life. The man who had once caught my eye across crowded rooms and winked at our private jokes now treated me like furniture, present but irrelevant. I felt like an uninvited guest at my own wake, watching people celebrate my departure while I sat among them still breathing. The conversations flowed around me without including me, family members sharing knowing glances and inside jokes that I was no longer meant to understand. That evening, I finally confronted Wesley in our bedroom as he prepared for sleep. The day's charade had drained my reserves of patience and politeness. "I know about the will," I said simply, standing in the doorway as he folded his clothes with mechanical precision. He didn't flinch, didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if he'd been waiting for this conversation and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "It's just in case," he said, his voice carrying the same rehearsed quality I'd heard over breakfast weeks earlier. "Erica says it's standard protection. The family has invested too much in building our reputation to risk it all on emotions." The word emotions dripped with disdain, as if love and commitment were childish concepts that practical adults needed to outgrow. This stranger wearing my husband's face spoke in Erica's cadence, using her phrases, echoing her priorities. "The man I married would have discussed this with me first," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Wesley shrugged, actually shrugged, as if my feelings were a minor inconvenience in his larger financial planning strategy. "Things change. We have to be realistic about the future." Standing there in our bedroom watching him methodically prepare for sleep after casually discussing my legal erasure, I realized I was grieving not just our marriage but the entire person I thought I had known. The Wesley who had written me love letters during our courtship, who had promised to cherish me through all of life's changes, had been systematically replaced by this hollow replica who spoke in corporate buzzwords and family-first platitudes. They expected tears. They anticipated drama, accusations, perhaps even threats of legal action. Instead, I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that seemed to unsettle Wesley more than any tantrum could have. "You're right," I said, moving to embrace him with the same warmth I'd shown for 3 years. "Family should come first. I'm so grateful Erica is looking out for everyone's best interests." My performance was flawless. I thanked them for their wisdom, praised their foresight, and expressed genuine appreciation for their careful planning. Inside, I felt the strange calm that comes after surviving a natural disaster, the eerie quiet that follows destruction, when the storm has passed and the real work begins. They mistook my serenity for surrender, my grace for defeat. How could they know that while they had been plotting my legal elimination, I had been conducting research of my own? How could they suspect that their precious family bloodline, the very foundation of their superiority complex, was about to crumble under the weight of scientific truth? I hugged each of them goodbye that Sunday with genuine affection, knowing it would be the last time I touched them as the naive woman who had believed in their love. When I walked out of Erica's house, I left behind every illusion about my place in their family. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I carried with me something far more valuable than their approval. I carried the knowledge that would soon turn their perfectly orchestrated world into ash. The knowledge I carried felt like carrying live ammunition, dangerous, powerful, and requiring careful handling. In the days following my discovery of their legal maneuvering, I moved through our house like a ghost, observing everything with new eyes while they remained blissfully unaware that their target had already armed herself for war. My weapon of choice had actually revealed itself weeks earlier, during one of my late-night internet sessions when sleep proved elusive. A bright banner advertisement had flashed across my screen. "Discover your true heritage. Connect with unknown relatives. Unlock family secrets." The irony of that last phrase would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so focused on survival. Initially, I'd scrolled past the ad without interest. Genealogy seemed like a hobby for people with too much time and too little drama in their lives. But something made me click back, perhaps the same instinct that had kept me listening at doorways and watching faces for subtle changes in expression. The Ancestry Service promised scientific accuracy in tracing bloodlines, matching DNA patterns with precision that courtrooms accepted as evidence. As I read testimonials from people who had discovered long-lost siblings, learned about unexpected ethnic backgrounds, and uncovered family mysteries spanning generations, an idea began forming in the shadows of my mind. I started researching genealogy with the intensity of someone preparing for doctoral exams. Late nights found me hunched over my laptop, learning about DNA matching algorithms, inheritance patterns, and the statistical probability of various family relationships. The science fascinated me, but more importantly, it offered possibilities I hadn't previously considered. During family gatherings, I began studying faces with renewed interest. Garrett's strong jawline had been passed down to Wesley with remarkable clarity, along with those distinctive brown eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. But Erica? The more I observed her features, the more they seemed borrowed from some other genetic palette entirely. Her delicate bone structure bore no resemblance to Garrett's robust build. Her green eyes appeared nowhere else in the family tree. Even her laugh carried a different musical quality than the deep, hearty chuckles that characterized Morrison family humor. These observations might mean nothing. Genetics could be surprisingly creative in its combinations, but they planted seeds of possibility that began growing in fertile soil. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of Elise's 72nd birthday celebration. She had always made grand productions of family milestones, insisting on elaborate dinners and meaningful gift exchanges that reinforced the bonds of blood and belonging. This particular birthday fell just 3 weeks after my devastating discovery about the will, giving me barely enough time to orchestrate my response. I practiced my pitch in the bathroom mirror until my enthusiasm felt genuine and spontaneous. The reflection staring back at me looked like the dutiful daughter-in-law they expected, eager to please, grateful to be included, slightly naive about the complexities of family dynamics. Perfect. I have such a fun idea for a family project, I announced during dessert, producing 4 elegantly wrapped boxes from my oversized purse. The packages were identical in size and wrapping, tied with cream-colored satin ribbons that matched Elise's favorite china pattern. Ancestry DNA kits, I exclaimed, distributing the gifts with theatrical excitement. I thought it would be amazing to trace our family heritage together. Imagine discovering where all this incredible Morrison strength and intelligence comes from. The response exceeded my wildest expectations. Elise actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child, her eyes sparkling with genuine pleasure. What a thoughtful idea! How exciting to learn about our roots together. Wesley rolled his eyes in that affectionate way husbands display when their wives suggest activities they find mildly silly but harmless. Do we really need science to tell us we're related? He asked, but his tone carried amusement rather than resistance. Erica's reaction proved most interesting. For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, her smile faltered and something flickered across her features that might have been concern. But the expression vanished so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. What a unique gift, she said carefully, turning the box over in her hands as if examining it for hidden dangers. I've never really thought about ancestry research. Cody, predictably, said nothing but nodded along with whatever enthusiasm his wife displayed, his role as perpetual agreement machine continuing without variation. The cost of the kits, $400, represented a significant expense on my modest salary, but I considered it the best investment I'd ever made. These small boxes contain the potential to reshape everything, to turn their carefully constructed world into something unrecognizable. Over the following days, I orchestrated the sample collection with military precision. Each family member needed to provide saliva samples according to specific instructions, and I volunteered to handle all the administrative details to ensure accuracy. My helpfulness was praised as typical thoughtfulness, when in reality it was calculated control. I hand-delivered each sealed sample to the postal facility myself, unwilling to trust such crucial evidence to regular mail pickup. The return address labels were filled out in my careful handwriting, ensuring that all results would come directly to me for coordination purposes. The waiting period stretched 8 weeks, 56 days that I counted off my calendar like a prisoner marking time until parole. I established a separate email account specifically for receiving results, checking it multiple times daily despite knowing the samples required substantial processing time. During those weeks, I became a master of normalcy. I attended family dinners with appropriate enthusiasm, participated in conversations about holiday planning and summer vacation possibilities, and maintained the facade of the grateful wife who had been graciously forgiven for imaginary transgressions. But beneath the surface, anticipation hummed through my veins like electricity. I was no longer the passive recipient of their machinations. I had become an active player in a game they didn't even realize had begun. When the results finally arrived, I felt like an archaeologist uncovering artifacts that would rewrite history. The digital files contained charts, percentages, and genetic maps that told stories more explosive than any family gossip. I spent hours analyzing the data, cross-referencing relationships, and ensuring I understood every nuance before proceeding. The custom design service I hired specialized in genealogical presentations for family reunions and anniversary celebrations. For $200, they created beautifully framed family trees with each person's unique genetic heritage displayed in elegant calligraphy. The charts looked official, precious, and worthy of prominent display in any family home. I selected colors and borders based on each family member's personal preferences. Wesley's chart featured navy blue accents that matched his favorite ties, while Elise's incorporated soft lavender tones she favored for spring decorating. Every detail was personalized to make the gifts feel thoughtful and celebratory rather than clinical or threatening. The irony wasn't lost on me as I wrapped each frame in delicate tissue paper and tied them with matching ribbons. I was literally gift-wrapping their destruction, presenting devastating truth in the most beautiful packaging I could create. The visual metaphor felt almost too perfect to be coincidental. Elise and Garrett's anniversary gathering provided the ideal venue for my revelation. For 47 years, their marriage had been held up as the gold standard of family commitment and traditional values. Family members would travel from 3 states to attend this annual celebration of enduring love and shared legacy. "I'm bringing something very special to honor your parents' incredible partnership," I told Wesley when confirming our attendance. "Something that celebrates the beautiful family they created together." He smiled indulgently, probably assuming I'd commissioned a portrait or compiled a photo album. His trust in my harmless intentions would make the impact even more devastating. As the anniversary date approached, I alternated between thrilling excitement and nauseating terror. The anticipation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I stepped forward, there would be no possibility of retreat. Everything, our marriage, their family, the entire structure of relationships I'd known for 3 years, was about to shatter into irreparable pieces. But after what they had done to me, after the casual cruelty and calculated erasure, I discovered that destruction felt remarkably like justice. The afternoon of the anniversary gathering arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made tragic endings feel especially cruel. Sunlight streamed through Elise's bay windows, casting everything in golden hues that would later feel like the last moments of innocence before a nuclear blast. I arrived carrying a vintage cake box containing Elise's favorite lemon torte and a carefully arranged gift bag holding 4 wrapped frames. My hands were steady now, my heartbeat calm. The weeks of anticipation had crystallized into an almost supernatural focus. This was my moment and I intended to savor every second. The living room buzzed with the comfortable chaos of family celebration. Cousins from Chicago shared updates about their children's college acceptances. Uncle Robert regaled anyone within earshot with stories about his recent fishing expedition. Aunt Margaret fluttered between conversations, ensuring everyone's wine glass remained full and that the cheese platter maintained its artistic arrangement. Elise presided over the gathering like a benevolent queen, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy dress accessorized with the pearl necklace Garrett had given her for their 25th anniversary. She glowed with the satisfaction of a woman whose life had unfolded exactly according to plan: devoted husband, successful children, financial security, and the respect of everyone who mattered. Wesley worked the room with practiced ease, discussing business developments with the men and complimenting the women on their spring fashion choices. He looked handsome in the gray sweater I'd bought him for Christmas, though I now noticed how he avoided meeting my eyes for extended periods. The guilt was probably eating at him, even if he didn't have the backbone to act on it. Erica commanded her usual position as social director, orchestrating conversations and ensuring that every guest felt appropriately entertained. She wore emerald green, always her most flattering color, and her confidence radiated through the room like a force field. Today she was the beloved daughter celebrating her parents' remarkable partnership, basking in the reflected glory of their enduring love story. I positioned myself strategically near the doorway, close enough to observe every reaction but with a clear escape route if the situation deteriorated beyond my control. From this vantage point I could see the entire room while remaining slightly removed from the central gathering, the perfect spot for a woman about to detonate a bomb. Before we cut the cake, I announced during a natural lull in conversation, I have something special to share with the family. I produced the gift bag with theatrical flourish, my voice carrying just the right note of excited anticipation. Remember those ancestry kits from Elise's birthday? The results came back and they're absolutely fascinating. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Elise clapped her hands together with childlike delight, while several family members expressed genuine curiosity about the genetic revelations. Even Uncle Robert, typically skeptical of anything involving modern technology, leaned forward with interest. I had them professionally framed, I continued, distributing the packages with ceremonious care. Each one is personalized with your individual heritage map. I thought it would be wonderful to unveil them together as a family. The wrapping paper rustled as 8 hands worked simultaneously to reveal the contents. I watched their faces with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment, memorizing every microexpression, every subtle shift in comprehension, every moment of dawning realization. Elise opened hers first, her fingers trembling slightly with excitement. The initial smile of anticipation transformed gradually into confusion, then concern, then something approaching horror. Her eyes darted across the genetic percentages, the family relationship indicators, the stark scientific data that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her own life. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continued rustling of wrapping paper. This says Erica and I are only a 50% match. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, acrid and impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath while trying to process the implications of what they'd just heard. Wesley stared at his own chart with the expression of someone trying to read a foreign language. His lips moved silently as he traced the family connections with his finger, attempting to reconcile the scientific data with the family history he'd known since childhood. He read the document once, twice, 3 times as if repetition might somehow change the results. Erica's face underwent a transformation that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so devastating. The confident glow drained from her complexion like water from a broken vessel, leaving behind a pale, hollow version of her former self. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for oxygen in an environment where breathing had suddenly become impossible. The silence stretched taut as a violin string until Cody broke it, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. He stood slowly, his own chart trembling in his hands like a leaf in a windstorm. It's not a mistake, he said, his tone carrying the flat certainty of someone stating an undeniable fact. According to this, Erica isn't Garrett's biological daughter. The crystal wine glass that slipped from Aunt Margaret's fingers seemed to fall in slow motion, its destruction creating a percussion that punctuated the moment with finality. The sound of shattering crystal was deafening in the absolute silence that had engulfed the room. Then came the gasps, sharp intakes of breath from people whose world had just shifted off its axis. Whispered conversations erupted like small fires around the room as family members turned to each other for confirmation, explanation, anything that might make sense of what they'd just learned. This can't be right, Elise managed, but her voice carried no conviction. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, that universal gesture people make when they can't catch their breath. The carefully maintained composure she'd cultivated over decades began cracking like old paint under pressure. Uncle Robert was the first to flee, grabbing his coat and muttering something about early morning appointments. His wife followed quickly, their departure creating a ripple effect that swept through the gathering like a contagion. Within minutes, people were making excuses and heading for the door, unable to process the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Cousin Janet paused at the threshold, her face a mask of shock and disgust. If she lied about that, she said to no one in particular, what else has she lied about? The question hung in the air like an accusation that would follow the family for generations. Erica finally found her voice, though it emerged as a strangled sound that bore little resemblance to her usual authoritative tone. This is ridiculous, she declared, but the words lacked any real force. She stormed toward the door, her coordination so compromised by shock that she nearly knocked over the anniversary cake. Its cheerful happy 47th anniversary message now seeming like a mockery of everything the family had believed about their history. Elise aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. The confident matriarch who had entered the afternoon dissolved before my eyes, replaced by a smaller, fragile woman whose entire identity had just been revealed as fiction. Her pearl necklace seemed suddenly too heavy for her delicate neck, and her hands shook as she tried unsuccessfully to process the ruins of her carefully constructed life. Wesley remained frozen in his chair, the genetic chart spread across his lap like a death certificate. His expression wasn't anger or confusion. It was the hollow, devastated look of someone who had just learned that everything he'd built his identity around was fundamentally false. I stood quietly in my corner, watching the destruction with the calm satisfaction of someone who had finally balanced an equation that had been troubling her for years. When the room had nearly emptied and only Wesley remained among the scattered gift wrap and abandoned wine glasses, I approached him with the same graceful composure I'd maintained throughout our marriage. "Next time you rewrite the future," I said, my voice steady and clear, "make sure your past isn't so fragile." Then I walked out through the front door, past the wilted spring flowers and abandoned cars in the driveway, leaving behind the smoking crater that had once been the Morrison family legacy. My legs felt unsteady, but my conscience was crystal clear. Justice, I discovered, tasted exactly like freedom. The drive home from Elise's house felt like traveling through a different dimension where gravity worked differently and colors had shifted to unfamiliar hues. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, not from fear, but from the strange euphoria that follows the successful completion of something monumentally difficult. I had just detonated a nuclear device in the middle of a family gathering, and somehow I felt more at peace than I had in months. The first sign that my carefully planted seeds were taking root came Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed with a text from Maria, Wesley's cousin who worked at the bank downtown. "Emergency family meeting tonight at Elise's. Thought you should know." She included a crying face emoji, as if the family crisis were a natural disaster rather than a long overdue reckoning. I didn't respond. There was nothing left for me to say to any of them. By Wednesday, the ripple effects had grown into tidal waves. Jessica, who ran the local flower shop and had always been friendly despite my outsider status, called with barely contained excitement masquerading as concern. "Sarah, honey, I just wanted to check on you. There are some wild rumors going around about Wesley's family." Her voice carried that particular tone people use when they're fishing for gossip while pretending to offer support. "Oh." I kept my response neutral, though I was genuinely curious about how the story was spreading. "Well, Donna from the country club said something about paternity issues. And apparently Erica hasn't been seen anywhere since Sunday. Her husband Cody came into the hardware store yesterday looking like he'd been hit by a truck." The speed of the gossip network impressed me. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, a scandal this juicy would spread faster than wildfire in August. Thursday brought confirmation that the damage was even more extensive than I'd anticipated. My former neighbor Linda caught me checking the mail and practically sprinted across the street to share the latest intelligence. "Did you hear about Elise calling that emergency meeting?" she asked breathlessly, her eyes bright with the thrill of being first to share devastating news. Only 3 people showed up. 3. Out of the entire extended family. Everyone else suddenly had prior commitments. The mental image of Elise sitting in her pristine living room, waiting for family members who would never arrive, filled me with something that wasn't quite satisfaction but certainly wasn't sympathy either. For years she had commanded the loyalty and attendance of dozens of relatives. Now when she needed them most, they had scattered like leaves in a hurricane. "And that's not even the worst part," Linda continued, leaning closer as if someone might overhear us on my own driveway. "Apparently, Erica's completely disappeared from social media. Her Instagram account, you know how she was always posting those perfect family photos? It's completely silent. Nothing for 4 days. I had actually checked this myself, unable to resist monitoring the destruction from a safe distance. Erica's Instagram had indeed gone dark after years of daily posts celebrating family values, holiday traditions, and the blessed life of being born into the right bloodline. The silence spoke louder than any explanation could have. The most devastating blow came Friday when Linda updated me on Cody's response to the revelation. "He moved out," she whispered, her voice carrying genuine shock. "Just packed his things and left. Barbara saw him loading boxes into his truck Wednesday night. Didn't even take the fancy furniture. Just his clothes and that old fishing equipment from the garage." The speed of Cody's departure surprised even me. I had expected anger, confrontation, perhaps even attempts to salvage the marriage despite the lies. Instead, he had simply vanished, leaving behind only the detritus of a relationship built on false foundations. Left his wedding ring on the kitchen counter, Linda added with the dramatic flair of someone who understood the symbolic power of abandoned jewelry. No note, no explanation. Just the ring and empty drawers. Meanwhile, my phone had become a monument to Wesley's deteriorating mental state. The calls began Sunday evening, just hours after I'd walked out of his mother's house. Initially, his voicemails carried the indignant tone of someone who believed he could explain away the unexplainable. "Sarah, this is insane. We need to talk about this rationally. There has to be some mistake with those tests. Call me back." Tuesday's messages evolved into something more desperate. "Please, Sarah. I know you're angry, but we can work through this. The family is falling apart. I need you to help me understand what's happening." By Thursday, the anger had transformed into raw pleading. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the will, about everything. I should have talked to you first. I should have trusted you instead of listening to. Please just answer the phone." The final voicemails were perhaps the most heartbreaking, not because I felt sorry for him, but because they revealed the complete dissolution of a man who had never learned to think for himself. These messages contained no words, just the sound of breathing, as if he had called simply to feel connected to something familiar in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. After 6 weeks of this digital haunting, I changed my number. The decision felt like cutting the last thread that connected me to a life I had finally outgrown. The social fallout proved even more spectacular than the family destruction. Elise, who had once commanded the respect and envy of the country club crowd, suddenly found herself persona non grata in circles where reputation meant everything. Invitations that had once arrived weekly simply stopped coming. Bridge games continued without her. Charity committee meetings somehow forgot to include her in planning discussions. I learned through various sources that she had started shopping in the next town over, apparently unable to face the whispered conversations and knowing looks that followed her everywhere in our community. The woman who had built her identity on social standing and family legacy now found herself effectively exiled from the very society she had worked so hard to impress. Even Garrett's memory suffered collateral damage. The memorial plaque that had honored his business contributions at the community center was quietly removed during routine maintenance that never quite resulted in its reinstallation. Decades of respect and admiration evaporated as people began questioning everything they thought they knew about the Morrison family. The legal implications proved even more devastating than the social consequences. Wesley's carefully orchestrated will, the document that was supposed to protect family assets from unworthy wives, became meaningless paperwork overnight. With Erica's paternity in question, her inheritance eligibility created a legal nightmare that consumed money faster than they could pay attorneys to untangle it. Wesley was forced to hire 3 different law firms just to understand his own financial situation. The estate they had fought so hard to protect from me was being devoured by legal fees and investigative costs. Private investigators charged thousands of dollars trying to identify Erica's biological father. A mystery that seemed to have no solution since Elise remained stubbornly silent about her past indiscretions. During this chaos, I quietly began rebuilding my life according to my own specifications. I found a small apartment with enormous windows that filled the space with natural light, something I had missed during my years in Wesley's traditionally decorated house. The walls remained beautifully bare, free from family photos and wedding pictures that would only remind me of my previous naive self. For the first time in years, I could eat dinner without carefully monitoring my words, without worrying about accidentally saying something that might be reported back to Erica or Elise. The silence in my new home wasn't lonely. It was liberating, like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for 3 years. Occasionally, I would catch my reflection in store windows and realize I was smiling without any particular reason. The expression looked foreign on my face after so many months of practiced politeness and manufactured happiness. But it felt genuine, earned through survival rather than circumstance. Peace, I discovered, was vastly underrated. And justice, when served at exactly the right temperature, tasted remarkably like freedom. Time, I discovered, was an excellent teacher. 3 years had passed since the anniversary gathering that became ground zero for the Morrison family's destruction, and I had learned to measure my life in seasons rather than catastrophes. Spring brought new flower varieties to experiment with. Summer delivered steady streams of wedding clients. Autumn provided reflection time, and winter offered the luxury of planning without pressure. The morning Wesley's wedding invitation arrived, I was repotting a particularly stubborn orchid that had been refusing to bloom despite perfect care. The envelope appeared among my usual mail: utility bills, supplier catalogs, a postcard from a former coworker vacationing in Italy, looking deceptively innocent for something that would reopen old wounds. The invitation itself was as impersonal as a business announcement. Crisp white cardstock with conservative black lettering announced the upcoming marriage of Wesley James Morrison to someone named Jennifer Louise Patterson. The font was traditional, the wording formal, and the overall design suggested it had been ordered from a catalog rather than personally selected with care and excitement. "The honor of your presence is requested." The phrase made me laugh out loud, a sound that echoed strangely in my quiet apartment. Honor? From a man who had conspired to erase me from his future while I slept beside him every night? The audacity would have been admirable if it weren't so pathetic. I studied the bride's name with the analytical interest of someone examining evidence. Jennifer Louise Patterson. The name sounded respectable, traditional, probably from a family with proper bloodlines and appropriate social connections. I wondered if Wesley had told her about Erica's spectacular fall from grace, or if he had simply edited that chapter from his personal history the way he tried to edit me from his will. The wedding date was 6 weeks away, just enough time for a perfectly orchestrated response. I spent an hour researching ancestry DNA companies, selecting one with the fastest processing time and most comprehensive family matching database. The kit cost $49, a small investment for what promised to be significant entertainment. I packaged it carefully in an elegant gift box, adding tissue paper and a satin ribbon that matched the wedding colors listed on the invitation. The note took longer to compose than the gift selection. I wrote and rewrote it several times, seeking the perfect balance between congratulations and warning, blessing and curse. "Dear Jennifer, I finally settled on, congratulations on your upcoming marriage. As a gift, I thought you might enjoy learning about the family heritage you're joining, just in case you're planning a family of your own. Wishing you all the clarity you deserve. Sarah." I scheduled the delivery for the day before the wedding. Timing, as I had learned, was everything. By the time they opened it, they would be too committed to the ceremony to back out, but not too late to begin questioning what other secrets might be lurking in Wesley's family tree. The real transformation in my life, however, had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with rediscovering who I was when no one was watching or judging. 2 years after my divorce finalized, I used my settlement money to lease a small storefront on the town's main street. The space had good bones: large windows, original hardwood floors, and enough room for both a workshop and a customer area. Willow and Bloom became more than just a business. It became my sanctuary. The name came to me during one of my late-night planning sessions, inspired by the resilience of willow trees that bend without breaking and the promise of flowers that bloom even after the harshest winters. Working with flowers awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. There was something deeply healing about creating beauty from individual elements, about coaxing life from stems and petals, about watching people's faces light up when they saw an arrangement that perfectly captured their emotions. My style developed organically, influenced more by instinct than formal training. I became known for unexpected combinations, pairing delicate roses with sturdy succulents, mixing wildflowers with exotic orchids, creating arrangements that shouldn't have worked but somehow achieved perfect harmony. Beauty from chaos, my regular customers called it, and the phrase became my unofficial motto. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the bakery next door, was my first regular customer and eventually became something like a friend. She ordered fresh arrangements for her display case every Monday and always lingered to chat about everything except what we both knew about my history with the Morrison family. "You have magic hands," she told me one afternoon, admiring a particularly successful combination of sunflowers and lavender. "But more than that, you have a peaceful spirit. People feel it when they walk in here." He was right. Clients often stayed longer than necessary, sharing details about their lives that had nothing to do with flower orders. Young mothers talked about the challenges of raising children while pursuing careers. Older women confided their fears about aging and irrelevance. Divorced women sought advice about rebuilding their identities after decades of defining themselves through their marriages. I listened without judgment, offered gentle encouragement without presuming to have all the answers. And somehow my little shop became an unofficial counseling center disguised as a flower boutique. The afternoon Elise appeared outside my window will remain etched in my memory with perfect clarity. I was arranging white lilies for a funeral service when I noticed her standing on the sidewalk, staring through the glass with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Vulnerability mixed with something that might have been regret. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Her hair, once perfectly styled, showed silver roots that suggested recent neglect of her usual beauty routine. Her posture lacked the confident bearing that had once made her seem taller than her actual height. For several minutes she simply stood there, occasionally glancing toward the door as if considering whether to enter. I continued working, pretending not to notice her presence while keeping her in my peripheral vision. Finally, she approached the window and pressed her palm against the glass, a gesture so tentative and desperate that I found myself moving closer. Our eyes met through the transparent barrier that might as well have been a chasm. I could see her lips moving, forming a single word that I read rather than heard: sorry. The apology hung between us for a moment that felt both eternal and insufficient. I nodded once, not in forgiveness but in acknowledgement. Some wounds heal, but they never forget the blade that caused them. She turned and walked away without attempting to enter the shop, her footsteps heavy with the weight of consequences she could never undo. After she disappeared around the corner, I watered my plants with extra care, feeling grateful for growth that came from truth rather than manipulation. The Morrison family's final chapter was being written without fanfare or drama. Cody's remarriage to a kindergarten teacher with laugh lines provided the most hopeful epilogue to the whole sordid story. His new wife, Emma, possessed all the warmth and genuine kindness that Erica had only pretended to have. They seemed happy in the simple, unremarkable way that healthy relationships appear when viewed from the outside. Erica herself had vanished from our community entirely, reportedly working at a chain restaurant in a neighboring state and using her maiden name like a protective shield. Her absence from family gatherings created a strange void, not because people missed her presence, but because her erasure made everyone uncomfortably aware of how thoroughly someone could disappear when the foundation of their identity proved to be quicksand. Family reunions continued, but they were smaller affairs now, attended by people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company rather than felt obligated to maintain appearances. The conversations were more honest, the laughter more genuine, and the overall atmosphere suggested that sometimes losing toxic members actually strengthens what remains. In the end, I realized that the best revenge truly wasn't dramatic confrontation or elaborate schemes designed to humiliate enemies. The best revenge was simply living well, finding peace, and allowing truth to do its own work in its own time. They had tried to write me out of their story, not realizing that I was already writing theirs. Their carefully constructed legacy had crumbled not because I destroyed it, but because I simply revealed what was already there. A foundation built on lies that could never support the weight of real scrutiny. The will they had changed so carefully became meaningless paperwork, useless as protection against consequences they had created themselves. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step aside and let people face the natural results of their own choices. My name might have been erased from their legal documents, but in the end, their names became whispered warnings about the price of deception, while mine became associated with resilience, grace, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving betrayal with dignity intact. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah served those personalized ancestry charts, knowing exactly what devastation was coming next. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Brooke Mitchell, 31 years old, and for most of my life, I've been known as the family disappointment. While my Harvard-educated sister saved lives as a neurosurgeon and my brother sold his tech startup for millions, I was the marketing coordinator my mother introduced with a sigh at family gatherings. My childhood was filled with backhanded compliments and not-so-subtle comparisons. That was until my portfolio manager Hannah called with news that would change everything. Before I tell you how my life completely changed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If my story resonates with you at all, hit that subscribe button because trust me, what happens next shocked everyone in my family. Growing up in Wellesley, an affluent suburb west of Boston, meant living surrounded by achievement. Our neighborhood was filled with doctors, lawyers, and business executives who sent their children to prestigious private schools and expected nothing but excellence. In our family, that standard was set and enforced primarily by my mother, Diane Mitchell. My mother built her reputation as one of Boston's most formidable corporate lawyers. She graduated top of her class from Yale Law School, made partner at her firm by 32, and approached parenting with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to the courtroom. Everything in our household was a measurement of success: grades, extracurricular achievements, social connections, and eventually, career trajectories. My father, James, worked as a financial consultant. While successful in his own right, he always existed somewhat in my mother's shadow. He was the more nurturing parent, but rarely contradicted my mother's harsh assessments. "Your mother just wants what's best for you," he would say after particularly brutal criticism sessions, a phrase I grew to resent almost as much as my mother's direct condemnations. Then there were my siblings, the golden children. My sister Kimberly, for years older than me, seemed genetically programmed for success. She was reading chapter books by kindergarten, skipped second grade entirely, graduated high school as valedictorian, and breezed through Harvard before entering its medical school. Now at 35, she's a neurosurgeon specializing in pediatric cases, saving children's lives while my mother collects newspaper clippings about her accomplishments. My younger brother Brian, despite being only 29, had already outpaced both of us in my mother's estimation. A math prodigy who taught himself coding by age 12, he graduated from Princeton with dual degrees in computer science and business. He launched his first tech startup during his senior year and sold it 2 years later for a sum that mother made sure everyone in our extended family knew about. And then there was me, creative, sensitive, and perpetually falling short. I still remember the first time I heard the phrase family disappointment. I was 8 years old and had just participated in the regional math competition that Kimberly had won 3 years running. Mathematics wasn't my strong suit, but mother insisted I follow in my sister's footsteps. When I didn't even place in the top 20, she didn't comfort me. Instead, as we walked to the car, she gripped my shoulder and said to her friend Linda, "Well, I suppose every family has its disappointment." I pretended not to hear, but those words burrowed deep. School was always challenging for me, not because I lacked intelligence, but because my brain worked differently. While my siblings thrived in rigid academic environments, I struggled with standardized testing and memorization. My report cards were filled with BS and the occasional C, each one prompting a lengthy lecture about Mitchell family standards. Kimberly never brought home anything less than an A, mother would say, waving my report card like evidence in a trial. And Brian is already taking advanced placement classes. What are we going to do with you, Brooke? What I lacked in traditional academic prowess, I made up for in creativity. By middle school, I discovered a passion for art and digital design. My bedroom walls were covered with my paintings and sketches. My computer was filled with digital creations and early attempts at website design. When I brought home a first-place ribbon from the school art show, I thought finally I'd found something to make mother proud. "That's nice, dear," she said, barely glancing at my winning portrait. But art doesn't pay the bills, does it? Unless you're Picasso, and let's be realistic. The pattern continued throughout my teenage years. Every achievement of mine was minimized, while my siblings' accomplishments were celebrated extravagantly. Kimberly's acceptance to Harvard prompted a catered party with 50 guests. When Brian won the state science fair, mother took out an announcement in the local paper. When I was selected for a competitive summer program in digital arts, mother told relatives I was just going to computer camp. Family gatherings became showcases for my siblings' achievements and subtle reminders of my inadequacies. Thanksgiving dinners featured aunt after aunt asking Kimberly about her medical research or uncle after uncle discussing Brian's business ventures. When they finally turned to me with a polite, "And what about you, Brooke?" mother would usually interject with, Brooke is still finding her way, or Brooke has always been our creative one, the subtext clear to everyone at the table. By high school graduation, I had internalized the narrative. I was the family disappointment, the one who would never measure up, the Mitchell who had somehow missed receiving the success gene. My self-esteem was in tatters, and worse, I believed I deserved the treatment I received because I had failed to meet the standards so effortlessly achieved by my siblings. What no one in my family seemed to notice or care about was how their constant comparisons and criticisms were crushing my spirit. The creative, enthusiastic child I had once been was replaced by a young woman filled with self-doubt and anxiety. Even my artistic pursuits, once my refuge, became sources of stress as I measured them against impossible standards. The saddest part? I started to believe them. I began to see myself through my mother's disappointed eyes, internalizing the idea that I was somehow fundamentally deficient. That belief would follow me into college and beyond, shaping decisions both large and small, until a single phone call would finally begin to break its power. The spring of my senior year of high school brought the next major installment in my family's disappointment saga, college acceptance letters. While Kimberly had been courted by every Ivy League school and Brian had received a full scholarship to Princeton, my applications yielded different results. Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. Mother's top choices all sent polite rejection letters. I was waitlisted at Cornell, but ultimately not accepted. The University of Massachusetts Boston, my safety school, welcomed me with open arms. When Mother saw the letter, her lips thinned to a barely visible line. "Well," she said, sliding the acceptance letter back across the kitchen counter, "I suppose UMass is fine for now. You can always transfer after a year when you've proven yourself. Just a phase." That night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Patricia. "No, not the flagship campus, just Boston. It's practically a community college. I don't know what went wrong with Brooke. We gave her all the same advantages as the others." Despite Mother's dismissal, I found my undergraduate years surprisingly liberating. Away from the constant comparisons of home, I began to discover who I actually was rather than who I wasn't. The UMass Boston campus was diverse, with students from various backgrounds and life experiences. For once, I wasn't surrounded by carbon copies of my high-achieving siblings. During my sophomore year, I discovered my passion for digital marketing and multimedia design. The blend of creativity and strategic thinking suited my skills perfectly. I excelled in my marketing courses, making the dean's list for the first time. When I called home with the news, Mother's response was tepid. "That's nice, honey. Did you know Kimberly just co-authored a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine?" I declared my major in marketing with a minor in graphic design, choices Mother dismissed as playing on computers all day. When I tried explaining the growing importance of digital marketing in the business world, she cut me off. "Brooke, people in our family are doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs. They don't make pretty pictures for social media. But I suppose someone has to do those jobs too." By senior year, I had secured an internship at a boutique marketing agency in Boston, which led to a job offer upon graduation. The starting salary was modest, but respectable for an entry-level position in the field. At my graduation dinner, Mother managed what she probably thought was a compliment. "Well, at least you finished something," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "That shows perseverance. And marketing is practical, I suppose." My first few years in the workforce brought new opportunities for family judgment. At every holiday gathering, the same pattern emerged. Kimberly would discuss her latest surgical innovation, Brian would mention his growing company's valuation, and then attention would reluctantly turn to me. "Brooke is working at, what's the name of that little marketing company again, dear?" Mother would ask, though she knew perfectly well. "Apex Digital Solutions," I would answer. "Yes, that's it. She helps with their social media." The dismissive simplification of my role as a marketing coordinator was deliberate and cutting. The Thanksgiving dinner when I was 26 remains particularly vivid in my memory. Uncle Robert asked how everyone's careers were progressing, and Mother seized the opportunity for another public assessment. "Well, 2 out of 3 of my children turned out successful, she said with a laugh that others around the table awkwardly joined. Kimberly just received a grant for her research, and Brian's company is opening a second office. Brooke is still at that marketing place. I sat there, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, feeling like I was 8 years old again, failing that math competition. Later, when I confronted Mother in the kitchen about her comment, she seemed genuinely confused. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Brooke. It was just a little joke. You know I'm proud of you for trying your best." The breaking point came at Mother's 60th birthday party. She had rented an elegant venue and invited over 100 guests, colleagues, friends, and family members from across the country. During her speech, she thanked her 2 successful children for organizing such a wonderful celebration, despite the fact that I had been the one who found the venue, designed the invitations, and coordinated with the caterer. As she accepted congratulations, I stood awkwardly holding the cake I had special ordered from her favorite bakery, invisible in plain sight. That night, I made a decision. I would limit my contact with my family to the bare minimum necessary to maintain civility. No more subjecting myself to constant judgment and comparisons. No more seeking approval that would never come. The following years were lonely but necessary. I attended obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional family dinners, but kept conversations superficial and visits brief. I declined weekend invitations and made excuses to miss informal get-togethers. The distance protected me from the worst of the criticism, but it also isolated me from any possibility of family support. During this period, my self-doubt reached its peak. Despite receiving promotions at work and positive feedback from clients, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fundamentally inadequate. I dated sporadically but sabotaged relationships before they became serious, convinced that anyone who truly got to know me would eventually see the disappointment my family saw. What my family didn't know was that during these years of apparent stagnation, I was quietly setting in motion a plan that would eventually change everything. A plan born from the desperate desire to prove them wrong once and for all. The seed for what I came to call my freedom plan was planted during a particularly difficult period at work. Our agency had taken on a new client, a financial services firm specializing in wealth management for young professionals. As the marketing coordinator assigned to their account, I spent hours immersed in their content, learning about investment strategies, compound interest, and the power of starting early. The concepts fascinated me, particularly the idea that modest but consistent investments could grow substantially over time. Unlike the get-rich-quick schemes that had made my brother a millionaire overnight, this was a path that suited my methodical nature and limited resources. Around this same time, I met Morgan Freeman, and yes, he'd heard every joke about sharing a name with a famous actor. Morgan was a new creative director at our agency, brought in to oversee the redesign of several major client websites. In his mid-40s, Morgan had an unusual background. He'd worked in finance for 15 years before making a career change to pursue his passion for digital design. We bonded during late nights at the office, finishing client presentations and troubleshooting website issues. When I mentioned my growing interest in personal finance, sparked by our wealth management client, Morgan became an unexpected mentor. The thing about money, he told me over coffee one morning, is that it's just a tool. Most people never learn how to use it properly. They either worship it or waste it. The smart ones make it work for them. Over the next few weeks, Morgan shared insights from his former career. He explained concepts that the wealth management content had only touched on: tax-advantaged accounts, dollar cost averaging, diversification beyond the basics. Most importantly, he introduced me to the concept of financial independence. What if, he asked one day, you could reach a point where working was a choice, not a necessity? Where your mother's opinion of your career couldn't hurt you because you didn't need her approval or anyone's to survive. The idea was revolutionary to me. I'd always seen money as something I needed to earn through work, not something that could eventually work for me. The possibility of financial autonomy represented something I desperately craved: freedom from judgment. With Morgan's guidance, I developed what we called my 5-year freedom plan. The first step was opening investment accounts, a 401k through work, a Roth IRA for tax-advantaged growth, and a standard brokerage account for additional investments. I had saved about $12,000 over my working years, not impressive by my family's standards, but a start. Morgan helped me research investment options that aligned with my risk tolerance and time horizon. Unlike my brother's high-risk ventures, I chose a more balanced approach: low-cost index funds for stable growth, a carefully selected handful of established companies with strong fundamentals, and just a small percentage allocated to higher-risk investments with greater growth potential. Think of it as a barbell strategy, Morgan explained. Most of your money is in solid, proven investments that will grow steadily over time. A small portion is in higher risk, higher reward opportunities. You don't need all of those to pay off, just one. To accelerate my savings rate, I made two significant life changes. First, I moved from my reasonably comfortable apartment to a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood, cutting my rent by nearly 40%. Second, I started a side hustle developing websites for small local businesses, using the skills I'd gained at work to earn extra income on evenings and weekends. My new lifestyle was Spartan by necessity. I sold my car and relied on public transportation. I cooked at home instead of eating out. I bought clothes secondhand or waited for significant sales. Every dollar saved went into my investment accounts, split according to the strategy Morgan and I had developed. When my mother saw my new apartment during a rare visit, her horror was evident. "Brooke, this is practically a closet. There isn't even room for a proper sofa. Is this really necessary? Your father and I could help if you're struggling this badly." I didn't tell her that my bank account balance was actually growing, not shrinking. I didn't explain that my budget lifestyle was a choice, not a result of failure. Instead, I simply said, "I'm comfortable here. It suits my needs." She left shaking her head, no doubt adding this to her mental list of my disappointments. Later that week, she sent me a check for $5,000 with a note saying, "For a better living situation." I deposited the check and put the entire amount into my investment accounts. My siblings were equally dismissive of my lifestyle choices. Brian, flush with cash from his successful startup, couldn't understand why I lived so frugally. "You need to take more risks, Brooke," he advised during one of our infrequent phone calls. "Playing it safe in a marketing job is fine, but you'll never get ahead that way. You should let me invest some money for you." Kimberly, to her credit, was less judgmental but equally misguided. "I worry about you," she said. "All work and no play. When's the last time you took a vacation or bought yourself something nice? Life isn't just about saving pennies." What none of them knew was that I had a regular standing appointment with Hannah Watson, a portfolio manager at the investment firm I'd opened my accounts with. Every quarter, Hannah and I would review my portfolio performance, make adjustments as needed, and update my investment strategy based on market conditions and my growing knowledge. Hannah became something of a confidant, one of the few people who knew the full extent of my financial activities. She understood my motivation. Not just building wealth but claiming independence, and respected my methodical approach. Most clients your age either ignore their investments entirely or check them obsessively, making emotional decisions, she told me during one of our meetings. "Your consistency is remarkable." 3 years into my 5-year plan, my portfolio had grown substantially. The bull market had certainly helped, but my disciplined approach and diverse investments were the real factors in my success. One particular investment, $5,000 placed in a promising AI education startup that Morgan had heard about through his network, was showing especially impressive gains as the company expanded rapidly. Through it all, I maintained absolute secrecy about my growing net worth. At family gatherings, I continued to be the marketing coordinator with a tiny apartment and modest lifestyle. I endured the pitying looks and backhanded compliments. I listened as Mother introduced Kimberly and Brian to her friends with pride and me as an afterthought. The Freedom Plan had become my secret strength. Each dismissive comment or comparative slight now bounced off a growing shield of financial confidence. I wasn't just saving and investing money, I was buying myself options, creating choices my family didn't know existed. Then came the Monday morning that changed everything. It started as a typical Monday. I woke at 5:30 a.m., completed my morning workout, and prepared for the day ahead. The weekend had included a mandatory family dinner celebrating Brian's latest business venture, a new app that had secured significant second-round funding. The evening had featured the usual parade of my siblings' accomplishments and subtle digs at my career stagnation. As I stirred almond milk into my coffee, I was already mentally preparing for a busy workday. We were launching a major campaign for a new client, and I had a presentation to finalize before the 10 a.m. meeting. I was reviewing my notes when my phone rang. The screen displayed Hannah Watson's name, which was unusual. Our quarterly meeting wasn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. "Hannah, good morning," I answered, immediately concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Brooke, I'm glad I caught you before work." Hannah's voice had an unusual quality, controlled excitement. "Do you have a minute to talk? This isn't something that should wait." My stomach tightened. Despite the overall growth of my portfolio, I'd always feared a market crash or some catastrophic investment failure would derail my carefully constructed plan. "What's wrong? Has something happened to my accounts?" "Nothing's wrong," Hannah replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Actually, something's very right. You remember that education technology startup you invested in about 2 years ago? EDUI. Of course. It had been one of my higher-risk investments, based on Morgan's recommendation. I'd put $5,000 into the company when they were still in early growth stages. They're being acquired. The deal was just announced internally to shareholders before the public release later today. Google is buying them for their adaptive learning algorithm. That's good news?" I wasn't sure why this warranted an early morning call. "Brooke, it's exceptional news. Based on the acquisition price, your $5,000 investment is now worth approximately $457,000. And that's just the cash portion. There's also a stock component that could increase the value further depending on Google's share price at closing." My coffee mug slipped from my hand, splashing hot liquid across the kitchen counter. I barely noticed. $457,000? My voice sounded distant, as though someone else was speaking. "That can't be right." "I triple-checked the figures before calling you," Hannah said. "With this windfall, combined with your other investments, your total portfolio value has just crossed the 7-figure mark. Brooke, you're officially a millionaire." I sank onto a kitchen stool, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter. "I need to see the numbers," I managed to say. "This doesn't seem real." "I'm sending you the detailed breakdown right now," Hannah replied. "You'll need to sign some paperwork regarding the acquisition. There are tax implications we should discuss, and we'll want to develop a strategy for reinvesting the proceeds. But Brooke, take a moment to let this sink in. This is the result of your consistent discipline and willingness to take calculated risks." After hanging up, I sat motionless in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by second-hand furniture in an apartment my mother deemed barely habitable, trying to process what had just happened. The notification sound from my phone jolted me back to reality. Hannah's email contained the confirmation I needed: spreadsheets, official documentation, and a personal note of congratulations. The numbers were real. My net worth, previously hovering around $200,000 after 3 years of aggressive saving and fortunate market timing, had quintupled overnight. My first call was to Morgan. Despite having moved to a different agency the previous year, he remained my trusted advisor and one of the few people who knew about my freedom plan. "Holy shit, Brooke," he exclaimed after I shared the news. "I knew EDUI had potential, but this is beyond what anyone expected. We need to celebrate. Dinner tonight, my treat. Anywhere you want." Through my shock, a question formed. "What do I do now, Morgan?" I wasn't expecting to reach my financial goals for at least another few years. "That's the beautiful part," he said. "You get to decide. Your original plan has accelerated, but the principles remain the same. Financial independence means choice. What do you want to do with this freedom?" What did I want? The question reverberated through my mind as I somehow made it through my workday, functioning on autopilot while internally processing my new reality. I sat through the client presentation, responded to emails, and attended a team lunch, all while carrying a secret that felt too enormous to contain. That evening, over dinner at a restaurant far nicer than my budget usually allowed, Morgan and I discussed practical next steps. Setting up meetings with a tax professional, considering more diversified investment strategies for the windfall, and exploring the possibility of purchasing a home instead of renting. "What about your family?" Morgan asked as we finished dessert. "Are you going to tell them?" The question struck at the heart of my uncertainty. Part of me wanted to rush to my mother's house and lay out bank statements and portfolio summaries on her perfectly polished dining table. "See? I'm not a disappointment after all. I've achieved something even Brian hasn't: financial independence before 35. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, recognized that financial validation wasn't the same as emotional healing. Would my mother's approval, finally earned through monetary success, actually fill the void her lifelong disappointment had created? Or would it simply reinforce the toxic idea that my worth was measured by financial metrics? "Not yet," I finally answered. "I need time to process this myself before dealing with their reactions." In the days that followed, I met with Hannah and other financial professionals to ensure my sudden wealth was properly managed. I began researching condominium options in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, not to impress anyone, but because I genuinely liked the area and wanted the stability of owning my home. At work, I maintained my normal routine, though with a newfound sense of calm. The constant anxiety about measuring up, about proving myself, had been replaced by something unfamiliar: confidence. Not arrogance, but the quiet certainty that I had options. I could stay in my current position because I chose to, not because I had no alternatives. For nearly 3 weeks, I kept my financial transformation completely private, telling no one besides Morgan and my financial advisors. I wanted to experience this new reality on my own terms before subjecting it to my family's judgment. Then came another family dinner invitation, this one impossible to decline. My mother had reserved a table at Sorellina, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian restaurants, to celebrate Brian's latest business success. The text message made her expectations clear: dinner at Sorellina this Saturday at 7 p.m. to celebrate Brian's new funding round. Business attire. Everyone will be there. No excuses. I knew then that the time for privacy had ended. The family dinner would be the setting for my revelation, whether I was fully prepared or not. Sorellina gleamed with understated luxury, all dark wood, crisp white tablecloths, and soft lighting that flattered its well-heeled clientele. My mother had requested a private dining area, ensuring our family drama would play out with appropriate exclusivity. I arrived precisely on time, having spent considerable effort on my appearance. Not in the designer dress mother would have preferred, but in a well-cut black pantsuit that projected confidence and professionalism. My hair was styled simply, my makeup minimal but precise. I looked competent, successful even, though not in the ostentatious way my mother might have wanted. The maitre d' led me to our table where my family was already assembled: mother and father, Kimberly and her neurosurgeon husband Thomas, Brian and his girlfriend Allison, who worked in venture capital. Mother's expression upon seeing me was its usual mixture of mild disappointment and resignation. "Brooke, darling, you made it," she said, rising for the perfunctory cheek kiss. "We were just discussing Brian's latest triumph. The Weinstein Fund has contributed to his Series B funding. $20 million. Isn't that remarkable?" "Congratulations, Brian," I said, taking the only remaining seat, at the far end of the table, naturally. "That's impressive." Brian launched into a detailed explanation of his company's valuation metrics and growth projections, terminology deliberately technical to emphasize the sophistication of his business acumen. Mother watched him with undisguised pride, occasionally adding commentary like, "Brian always had an eye for opportunity," or "We knew from his first computer programming class that he was destined for tech success." The waiter arrived to take our orders, momentarily pausing the Brian appreciation ceremony. After selecting our meals and a wine that Mother deemed acceptable, the conversation shifted briefly to Kimberly's recent publication in a prestigious medical journal. They're considering her for the Lasker Award, Mother informed the table, though this was clearly not news to anyone but me. The youngest nominee in the category's history. Not quite the youngest, Kimberly corrected with practiced modesty, but certainly among them. Father, who had remained largely silent as was his custom, made a brief attempt at inclusion. "And how are things with you, Brooke? Anything new at work?" Before I could answer, Mother interjected, "Brooke received a promotion recently, didn't you, dear? What was the title again?" "Senior Marketing Strategist," I replied, knowing full well she remembered, but chose to minimize it. "Yes, that's it. Moving up the ladder at your little agency. That's nice." The dismissive tone was familiar, but for once, it didn't sting. The knowledge of what was in my investment accounts provided an invisible shield against her judgment. Brian, never one to miss an opportunity for condescension masked as helpfulness, leaned across the table. "You know, Brooke, I could always find something for you at my company. Our marketing team is expanding, and with your experience, limited as it may be to smaller clients, you might fit in somewhere on the team. Entry-level positions can be stepping stones." "Entry-level," I repeated, an unexpected laugh escaping me. "Brian, I've been in the industry for nearly a decade." "Yes, but corporate marketing for a tech startup is a different animal," he explained with the patronizing tone he reserved for those he deemed less business-savvy. "The pace, the stakes, it's not like running social media campaigns for local businesses." I took a sip of water, using the moment to decide. This was it, the opening I needed. The perfect segue had presented itself, and I could feel Morgan's encouraging presence in my mind. "Own your success, Brooke. You've earned it." "Actually," I said, setting my glass down deliberately, "I've been thinking about making a career change." This caught everyone's attention. Mother's eyebrows rose fractionally, the most surprised she would allow her Botox to display. "Oh," she said. "Finally reconsidering law school?" I always said it wasn't too late. "Not law school," I replied. "I'm considering starting my own digital marketing consultancy, focusing on helping small to mid-sized businesses develop comprehensive online strategies. There's a significant market gap there." The table fell silent for a beat too long. Mother recovered first. "Brooke, darling, starting a business requires capital, experience with high-level clients, and, frankly, a certain business acumen." She glanced at Brian as she emphasized the last point. "Perhaps in a few more years, after you've saved and gained more experience." "I have the capital," I stated simply. Father frowned. "Did you take out a loan?" "Brooke, in this economic climate, no loans," I interrupted gently. "I've been investing for the past 3 years. Quite successfully, as it happens." Brian's interest was piqued. Investments were his territory. "What sort of investments?" "Not those micro-investing apps, I hope. They're basically toys, not serious financial tools. A diversified portfolio. Index funds, established growth companies, and a few strategic early-stage investments in promising startups." I maintained eye contact with him as I continued. "One of which was just acquired by Google. My initial $5,000 investment is now worth over $450,000. The silence that followed was profound. Mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Father's fork clattered against his plate. Kimberly's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Brian recovered first, skepticism evident in his tone. "That's a nearly 100 times return. That kind of multiple is extremely rare, even in venture capital." "I'm aware," I replied, unable to keep a slight smile from forming. "I was fortunate. But it wasn't just luck. I researched thoroughly and took a calculated risk based on solid fundamentals and growth metrics." "Brooke," Mother said, her voice carrying a warning tone that suggested I might be exaggerating, "are you certain about these figures? Investment returns can be complicated to calculate correctly." Rather than argue, I reached for my phone, opened my portfolio app, and slid it across the table to her. "See for yourself. That's just the brokerage account. There's also my Roth IRA and 401k, which bring my total portfolio value to just over $1.2 million. Mother stared at the screen, color draining from her face as she processed the numbers. Father leaned over to look, his expression shifting from doubt to astonishment. "My God, Brooke," he whispered. "This is extraordinary." Mother passed the phone to Brian, who scrutinized it with the intensity of someone searching for evidence of fraud. Finding none, he handed it back to me, his expression unreadable. "Well," Mother said finally, reaching for her usual control, "I suppose you always had your father's head for numbers. It must have just taken longer to manifest in you than in Brian." The familiar attempt to rewrite history, to claim my success as somehow resulting from family traits rather than my own efforts, despite their discouragement, might once have infuriated me. Now, it merely amused me. Before I could respond, Father did something unprecedented. He contradicted Mother. "No, Diane," he said firmly. "Brooke did this entirely on her own. We never encouraged her financial interests. In fact, you especially, dismissed them. This success belongs to Brooke alone, and I for one am incredibly proud of her initiative." The table fell silent again. Father rarely challenged Mother, particularly in public. His doing so now, in defense of my accomplishments, felt like its own kind of vindication. Kimberly was the first to break the tension. "Brooke, this is amazing," she said, and her smile seemed genuinely warm. "I had no idea you were so involved in investing. You must have been living on practically nothing to save enough for this kind of portfolio growth." "That tiny apartment," Mother murmured, realization dawning. "The modest wardrobe. You weren't struggling, you were saving." "Strategic frugality," I confirmed. "Every dollar I didn't spend went into my investment accounts." Brian's competitive nature couldn't stay subdued for long. "Which other startups did you invest in? What was your selection methodology? Did you use a specific valuation model?" The barrage of questions was his way of reclaiming expert status, of re-establishing the hierarchy where he was the financial genius of the family. I answered simply, without the jargon he expected, which seemed to frustrate him further. The remainder of dinner passed in a surreal haze. Mother was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the shift in family dynamics. Father asked thoughtful questions about my investment strategy and business plans. Kimberly seemed genuinely interested in my experiences. Only Brian maintained a competitive edge, repeatedly mentioning that his company's valuation made him worth considerably more on paper. As we prepared to leave, Mother pulled me aside near the coat check. "Why didn't you tell us, Brooke? All this time we thought that I was the family disappointment." I finished for her. "Yes, I know exactly what you thought. What you told everyone to think." "That's not fair," she protested, but weakly. "We only wanted what was best for you." "No," I corrected gently, "you wanted me to be what was best for you. There's a difference." I collected my coat and headed for the door, a curious mixture of emotions swirling within me. The validation I'd imagined felt hollow compared to the realization that financial success hadn't magically healed the wounds of years of emotional neglect. Yet there was also a strange sense of closure. I'd finally proven myself on terms my family understood, even if those weren't the terms that mattered most to me anymore. Driving home to my soon-to-be former tiny apartment, I felt neither triumphant nor bitter. Instead, I experienced something unexpected: compassion. For my younger self who had internalized so much undeserved shame, for my father who had finally found his voice, even for my mother whose rigid definitions of success had limited her ability to appreciate her own daughter. The confrontation was over, but the real work of redefining my relationship with my family was just beginning. The aftermath of the Soralina revelation was immediate and overwhelming. My phone began buzzing with notifications before I even reached my apartment: text messages, emails, and voicemails from family members processing the shift in our established dynamic. Mother's approach was predictably practical, bypassing any acknowledgement of past criticism to focus on future opportunities. "I've set up a lunch with Harold Weinstein. He's one of the top financial advisors in Boston. Tuesday at 1 p.m. at the Harbor Club. Don't be late." I declined politely but firmly, Thank you, but I already have a financial team I trust. I'm not looking for new advisors at this time. Her response came quickly. Harold manages portfolios 10 times the size of yours. He can take you to the next level. My current advisors have helped me achieve exceptional returns. I'm comfortable with our relationship. This pattern continued for days. Mother attempting to insert herself into my financial decisions, me establishing boundaries she'd never before encountered from me. It was clear she was struggling to reconcile her long-held view of me as the family disappointment with this new evidence of my success in an arena she respected. Kimberly's approach was markedly different. Her first message was simple: I owe you an apology. Coffee this week? We met at a quiet cafe near Massachusetts General Hospital during her break between surgeries. Unlike our usual interactions, which followed Mother's template of Kimberly sharing her achievements while I listened admiringly, this conversation had a different tenor from the start. I've been thinking about how I've treated you, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. Not just recently, but over the years. I never challenged Mother's narrative about you, even when I could see how much it hurt you. I was complicit in that, and I'm truly sorry. Her candor surprised me. You were the golden child, I said. It was a comfortable position. Comfortable but constraining, she admitted. Do you know how terrified I've always been of failure? One wrong move, one failed surgery, one misdiagnosis, and I'd lose the only identity I've ever had, the successful daughter. At least you got to discover who you really are outside of Mother's expectations. This perspective shift, seeing my struggle as something that had ultimately benefited me while her apparent advantage had its own costs, was revelatory. Over the next hour, Kimberly and I began rebuilding our relationship on more equal footing, sharing vulnerabilities and hopes in a way we never had as children. Brian's reaction followed a different trajectory. Initially defensive and competitive, my company's valuation is still higher than your portfolio. He gradually shifted to treating me as a potential business resource. We should discuss co-investment opportunities, he suggested during one of his increasingly frequent calls. I have access to deals you wouldn't see otherwise. While I maintained a polite relationship with Brian, I was careful to keep our financial discussions limited. His need to position himself as the more successful sibling hadn't diminished. It had merely adapted to acknowledge me as competition rather than an afterthought. Father's response was the most surprising and touching. He called me the day after the dinner, his voice carrying an emotion I rarely heard from him. I failed you, Brooke, he said without preamble. I should have stood up for you years ago. I let your mother's intensity dictate how we treated you, and that was wrong. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, but more importantly, I'm proud of who you are, your resilience, your determination, your integrity. Why now, Dad? I asked, the question that had lingered for years. Why didn't you ever say anything before? His sigh carried decades of regret. The path of least resistance becomes a habit. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just avoiding conflict. Watching you stand your ground last night made me realize how much courage I've lacked all these years. This conversation marked the beginning of a genuine relationship with my father, separate from Mother's influence. We began meeting for breakfast every other week, catching up on each other's lives and slowly rebuilding the trust that had been damaged by his years of passive enabling. As my family recalibrated to my new status, I focused on implementing the plans I'd been developing. I gave notice at my agency, explaining that I was starting my own consultancy. My colleagues were surprised but supportive, and my boss even became my first client, contracting my new company to handle projects their team was too busy to manage. I purchased a condominium in Back Bay, not the largest or most expensive in the building, but a space that felt both comfortable and reflective of my success. The two-bedroom unit with large windows and a small balcony overlooking the neighborhood was a far cry from my tiny rental, but I furnished it thoughtfully rather than ostentatiously, creating a home rather than a showcase. Mother insisted on visiting shortly after I moved in. She arrived with a housewarming gift, an expensive crystal vase that suited her taste more than mine, and immediately began assessing the property with the critical eye I'd grown up dreading. The finishes are nice, though I would have chosen marble for the countertops instead of quartz, she noted, running a finger along the kitchen island. And this living room could accommodate a larger sofa. You have the space now, you should use it. As she continued her evaluation, I felt old patterns threatening to re-emerge, her judgment, my defensive justification, followed by my inevitable feeling of inadequacy. But something had fundamentally changed. The financial security I'd built had translated into emotional security I'd never before possessed. "Mom," I said, interrupting her critique of my lighting fixtures, "I need to say something." She paused, looking mildly surprised at my interruption. "For most of my life, you've made me feel like I wasn't enough," I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Not smart enough, not successful enough, not accomplished enough." Always the disappointment compared to Kimberly and Brian. "Brooke, that's not, please let me finish. This isn't about my investment success or this apartment or my new business. It's about the fact that your approval has always been conditional on achievements you deemed worthy. Do you know how damaging that is to a child? To grow up believing your parents' love depends on your accomplishments?" Mother sat down heavily on my allegedly too small sofa, her expression a mixture of defensiveness and genuine confusion. "I've always wanted what's best for you. Everything I did was to push you to reach your potential. No, you wanted me to reach the potential you defined for me. But I'm not Kimberly or Brian. I'm me with different strengths, different interests, different measures of success." "I never meant to hurt you," she said, though her tone suggested she still didn't fully understand my point. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished now." "That's just it," I replied. "You're proud now that I've succeeded financially. But I needed you to be proud of me all along for my creativity, my resilience, my kindness. For who I am, not what I achieve." The conversation that followed was difficult, with Mother alternating between defensiveness, "We gave you every advantage," and revisionism, "I always believed in you in my own way." She wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in my emotional struggles, but it was the first time we'd ever had such an honest exchange about our relationship. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "I may not have always shown it properly, Brooke, but I do love you. I always have." It wasn't the full recognition I might have wanted, but it was a start. A small crack in the foundation of our dysfunctional dynamic that might eventually allow something healthier to grow. The months that followed brought significant changes. My consultancy, Mitchell Digital Strategies, grew rapidly as word spread about my innovative approach to helping smaller businesses compete effectively online. I hired 2 employees within the first 6 months and was considering bringing on more to handle our expanding client list. But beyond professional success, I experienced personal growth that was even more meaningful. Working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, I began to untangle the complex web of beliefs about myself that had formed during my years as the disappointment. I learned to recognize my intrinsic worth separate from external validation and to set healthy boundaries with family members. I also discovered a renewed passion for the creative pursuits I'd abandoned under Mother's criticism. I took painting classes at the Museum of Fine Arts, finding joy in the process rather than worrying about the result. I joined a writing group that met weekly to share and critique each other's work. These activities nourished parts of myself that had been neglected for too long. Perhaps most significantly, I began mentoring young professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds who were interested in marketing and digital media. Remembering how Morgan had guided me when I needed direction, I wanted to provide similar support to others facing obstacles. This led to establishing a small scholarship fund for creative arts students at UMass Boston, my alma mater that Mother had once dismissed as practically a community college. As my business grew and my personal life flourished, family dynamics continued to evolve. Kimberly and I developed a genuine friendship, meeting regularly for dinner or weekend outings that had nothing to do with family obligations. Father became more assertive in standing up to Mother, not just regarding me but in expressing his own preferences and opinions after decades of acquiescence. Brian remained Brian, competitive and status-conscious. But even he seemed to be maturing somewhat, occasionally asking for my perspective on marketing strategies for his company without immediately dismissing my suggestions. And Mother was trying in her way. She still lapsed into old patterns of criticism and comparison, but now caught herself more often. Our relationship remained complicated, but the emotional charge had diminished. I no longer sought her approval with the desperation of a child starved for validation. I could appreciate her strengths while acknowledging her limitations, including her limited capacity for the unconditional love I had craved growing up. Nearly a year after the revelatory dinner at Soralina, Mother hosted a family gathering at her home. As we sat around the dining table, the same table where I had endured countless uncomfortable meals, she did something unprecedented. "I'd like to say something," she announced after dinner had been served. "I've been reflecting on our family dynamics, particularly how I've interacted with each of you." She looked directly at me. "Especially you, Brooke. I realize now that I've been unfair in many ways, measuring your success against a very narrow standard. Your path has been different, but no less valid or impressive." The table fell silent. This public acknowledgement from Mother, who never admitted fault, was extraordinary. "I'm proud of all three of my children," she continued. "Not because of your careers or accomplishments, though those are certainly noteworthy, but because of who you are as people. I haven't always expressed that well, and for that, I apologize." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from the residual pain of past disappointments, but from the recognition that people, even someone as seemingly immutable as my mother, could grow and change. Her acknowledgement wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase years of hurt, but it represented a shift I had never thought possible. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. My financial windfall had been the catalyst for change, but the true transformation had been internal, redefining success on my own terms, healing old wounds, and building a life that reflected my authentic self rather than someone else's expectations. The family disappointment had disappeared, not because I had finally measured up to arbitrary standards, but because I had outgrown the need for external validation altogether. In its place stood a woman who understood that the most meaningful success wasn't measured in dollars or status, but in self-acceptance, purpose, and genuine connection. It's been just over a year since my portfolio manager made that life-changing call, and sometimes I still wake up wondering if it was all a dream. Not the financial part, my thriving consultancy and comfortable Back Bay condo are tangible reminders of that reality. What occasionally seems surreal is the transformation in my family relationships and, more importantly, in how I view myself. Mitchell Digital Strategies has grown beyond my initial projections. We now employ 10 people. A mix of strategists, designers, and content specialists, and have moved from my home office to a proper workspace in the South End. Our client list includes businesses ranging from local restaurants to regional healthcare providers, all benefiting from our specialized approach to digital marketing for mid-sized organizations. What gives me the most satisfaction isn't the company's profitability, though that's certainly pleasant, but the culture we've created. Unlike the cutthroat, achievement-at-all-costs environment I grew up in, our team celebrates collaboration, creativity, and work-life balance. We measure success not just in metrics and conversions, but in client relationships and employee satisfaction. My personal relationships have undergone equally significant evolutions. Kimberly and I now have standing dinner dates twice a month, conversations that range from professional challenges to childhood memories to current events. Without Mother's comparative framework constantly positioning us as competitors, we've discovered a genuine sisterly bond that had been suppressed for decades. "I always wanted to be closer to you growing up," she confessed during one of our dinners. "But I was afraid if I didn't maintain my perfect daughter status, I'd end up on the receiving end of the criticism you faced. It was easier to stay in my lane and play my assigned role." "We were both trapped in Mother's narrative," I replied. "Just in different ways." Our relationship now includes not just emotional support, but practical collaboration. Kimberly has introduced me to medical professionals needing marketing services, while I've helped her develop a more engaging online presence for her research foundation. Father has undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. After decades of deferring to Mother, he's found his voice not just in defending me, but in expressing his own preferences and interests. He's taken up woodworking, a hobby Mother previously dismissed as messy and pointless, and has begun reconnecting with old friends Mother had deemed not our sort of people. During one of our breakfast meetings, he shared a revelation. I was so focused on providing financially that I forgot to provide emotionally, especially for you, Brooke. I thought if I kept the peace with your mother and maintained our lifestyle, I was doing my job as a father. I missed what you really needed. Which was? I asked, though I knew the answer. An advocate. Someone to see you for who you really were, not who your mother wanted you to be. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I can't get those years back, but I'm trying to make up for it now. Brian remains the family member with whom I have the most complicated relationship. His competitive nature hasn't fundamentally changed, though he's learned to be less overt about it since Mother's public recalibration of family dynamics. We maintain a cordial relationship, speaking at family gatherings and occasionally consulting on business matters, but without the deeper connection I've established with Kimberly and Father. And Mother. Mother continues to surprise me. Progress isn't linear, and she still occasionally slips into old habits of criticism or comparison, but she catches herself more quickly now. Our relationship has developed a new foundation based on mutual respect rather than her judgment and my desperate need for approval. The most unexpected moment in our evolving relationship came during a garden party she hosted for her social circle, events that had once been showcases for my siblings' achievements and tacit reminders of my inadequacies. As guests mingled on the terrace, Mother clinked her glass for attention. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began with her usual polished charm. "And I especially want to acknowledge my daughter Brooke, who recently received the Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40 recognition for her innovative work in digital marketing." Heads turned toward me, and I felt a momentary flash of the old anxiety, being put on display, measured, potentially found wanting. But Mother continued in a tone I'd rarely heard from her. "What makes me proudest isn't the award itself, though that's certainly impressive. It's the way Brooke has built her business with integrity, creativity, and genuine concern for her clients and employees. She's created success on her own terms, which takes courage I'm not sure I would have had at her age." The acknowledgement wasn't just of my professional accomplishments, but of the values underlying them. A recognition that my different approach to success had merit on its own terms, not just because it had ultimately led to financial rewards. It was the closest Mother had ever come to saying, "I was wrong about you all along." Later, when I thanked her for the unexpected praise, she said something that suggested genuine growth. "I'm learning, Brooke. Slowly, perhaps, but I'm learning." Beyond family healing, this year has brought personal rediscovery. I've reconnected with passions abandoned years ago under the weight of criticism and comparison. My condo now includes a small studio space where I paint, not for exhibitions or acclaim, but for the pure joy of creation. I've joined a community theater group, rediscovering the love of performance I'd set aside after Mother deemed drama club a distraction from serious academics. These creative pursuits nourish something essential in me that had been starved for too long. There's a particular pleasure in engaging in activities with no metric for success beyond my own enjoyment and growth, a concept that would have been incomprehensible to the achievement-oriented family I grew up in. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my transformation has been the opportunity to help others. Remembering how Morgan's mentorship changed my trajectory, I've established a formal mentoring program for marketing students from underprivileged backgrounds. The Mitchell Creative Scholarship now supports 5 UMass Boston students annually, providing not just financial assistance, but professional guidance and internship opportunities. During a recent mentoring session with Jasmine, a first-generation college student with extraordinary design talent but limited professional connections, I recognized my younger self in her mixture of ambition and uncertainty. "I'm worried I won't measure up," she confessed. "Everyone else seems to know exactly what they're doing, and I'm just figuring it out as I go." "Can I tell you a secret?" I replied. "Everyone is figuring it out as they go." Success isn't about knowing all the answers or never making mistakes. It's about learning from those mistakes and staying true to your own definition of what matters. In that moment, I realized how far I'd come from the young woman who believed she was fundamentally inadequate because she couldn't meet someone else's arbitrary standards. The greatest investment I'd made wasn't financial, but emotional, investing in my own self-worth and authentic path. Financial independence gave me options, but emotional independence gave me freedom. Freedom from the crushing weight of others' expectations, freedom to define success on my own terms, freedom to live a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's vision. The family disappointment no longer exists, not because I finally measured up, but because I finally understood that the measuring stick itself was flawed. True success isn't counted in dollars, degrees, or status symbols. It's measured in authenticity, purpose, and connection. It's found in the courage to chart your own course even when others question your direction. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you're not enough or that you're being measured by standards that don't reflect who you truly are, I hope you'll take this to heart. You are not a disappointment. Your path doesn't need to mirror anyone else's to have value. Your worth isn't determined by achievements that can be listed on a resume or displayed on a mantle. The most important approval you'll ever receive is your own. And that, more than any portfolio value or business success, is what I'm most grateful to have finally discovered. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt pressured to meet someone else's definition of success? How did you break free and find your own path? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story touched you in any way, please hit that subscribe button. Let's build a community where we can all define success on our own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most valuable asset you'll ever have is belief in yourself.